Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Transmedia Arts Seminar, co-sponsored by Harvard Mahindra Humanities Center and MetaLab at Harvard. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Robert Pratten, who will be talking about simulation of real-life crises in order to prepare and to figure out how to handle them. Robert Pratten is a well-known transmedia theorist and artist. He has worked for a number of large corporate clients, but also for UN Office on Counterterrorism and the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office. He has designed a number of alternate reality games and have written a book, Getting Started in Transmedia Storytelling, a Practical Guide for Beginners. Robert is a well-known figure in transmedia world. He has his own company, CONDUCTTR, which does those large-scale simulations, and he has written extensively on transmedia design for both corporate clients and for artists. So we are very thrilled and welcome to have him talk to us today. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's great to be here. It's good to be back in this presenting seat.
So I'm going to disappear and leave Robert and the lecture for you guys to hear and to enjoy.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, everyone. It's really nice to see so many people attending live. And to all you people that are catching up on the video, well, thank you very much. I'm sorry you couldn't be here live, but it's great that you're tuning in now. So yeah, so my name's Robert Pratten. I'm the founder and CEO at CONDUCTTR, and our mission is to make everyone's life an adventure. And the reason we think that's important is that through adventure, people can achieve their full potential in life. And the reason adventure is important, because what it implies really is that there's a challenge and there's like a certain amount of fun and excitement. And through that challenge, we kind of grow our we expand our comfort zone, so we keep sort of getting better and so on. And the way that we create these adventures is through combining storytelling and technology. And where we want to be as a business is a global leader in mixed reality environments. And this diagram on the right hand side explains kind of where we believe we sit, and it's at this intersection of kind of human interaction with computing and with the environment. I've got another slide here that looks at mixed reality, and it kind of presents it as a spectrum. So on the right hand side is what I would call a purely synthetic environment. So this is the digital realm, and a good example of that is virtual reality. So you put on the headset, and it doesn't matter where you're located physically, your eyes and let's say your mind goes to some kind of a virtual space. On the other side is much closer to the physical realm, and this would be things like augmented reality. So Snapchat filters, the filter I'm using right now on this call to represent my background is kind of taking a bit of the real world and doing some sort of digital magic on it. So we're much more down this end. We're much more interested in mixed reality in physical space. And I've divided this presentation into a number of sections. I wanted to give a quick overview of kind of what we did, right, where we started from to get to where we are now, because all of that kind of storytelling, narrative design, and participatory transmedia experiences has really prepared us for what we're doing now in the corporate space and the sort of government space, where we're doing crisis simulations. So a good example of mixed reality type experience that we've done in the past. So this was for the World Bank. It was for Davos in 2017, and there were 10 of these boxes, and different groups of world leaders were given one of these boxes, and inside there was the story of a person that was trying to cope with a pandemic. So this was set in Africa, and it was predominantly around the idea of Ebola. And inside the box, there was a phone, because we didn't expect any world leaders to actually call a number on their own mobile phone. And, you know, we'd obviously capture their number or whatever. So there was a mobile phone, and they would press the speed dial button. They got through to basically a kind of like a voicemail message from that character who owned all the artifacts in the box. And then that phone call was a trigger event to start sending like subsequent text messages and other phone calls and so on. So we had this mix of people in a physical space discussing how they're going to deal with a pandemic situation from this one particular person's point of view, while this other information was coming in on a digital space. And this is a picture of the team, a recent one. You see like some people wearing, well, one person wearing a mask here. There's 17 of us in the company, so this is just half of us, and we're quite a good mix actually. We've got a lot of diversity in the team of ages and sort of gender, and also in terms of background. So even the people that would say work on the creative side are interested in technology, and all the technology people are interested in the creative side. So that works really well for us. And this was a photograph that we took while we were researching for a project for Canal Plus. And this was for season 3 of Game of Thrones. So that gives you an idea of how long ago this was. And what I'm showing here is an actor. This was the person that we brought in. It was got a scripted piece to say to these fans. All these fans were invited from the Game of Thrones Facebook page in Spain, and he calls them to action and saying, you know, basically there's going to be a war, and there's going to be a battle for who's going to be the sort of king of the Andals and the first men. And then from this physical encounter, the story and the participatory experience goes online, and over a series of 10 weeks while the TV show played out, we turned the whole of Spain into Westeros, and people were able to compete to become the king or the queen through seducing each other, through betrayal, and eventually there was a final winner. We had 1,000 people turn up in the Plaza Mayor in Spain, in Madrid, to be crowned King of the Andals and the First Men. So this is the guy who's flown from the Balearic Islands, and you can see we've got the normal props you would associate with Game of Thrones. So it's quite a good mix of storytelling, participation online, and also you know, in face-to-face. And one of the things that we do all the time is try to draw inspiration, even though we're in a corporate space, and a lot of our clients wouldn't think of what we do as games, because games are kind of childish. Games are not things that serious people take part in. Not everyone believes that, but a lot of people. There's a lot of inspiration that can be gained from them. So here we are at a War of the Worlds experience, and so we'll sort of do this as a team, and then we'll kind of reflect on what we liked about the experience, what drew us in, what did we like about it. And we also have we play a lot of collaborative games, looking at how people exchange and negotiate across the different things. So usually we'll play this on a Friday afternoon, which sort of sets us up for the weekend. So we play the game and we talk about what we like about the mechanics. And a lot of this gaming sometimes rolls over into the corporate space. So UEFA is a client. This is Natalie. She basically runs the company. She's head of product development and takes care of everything. And so we created some experiences for UEFA, particularly around the Champions League and so on. And sticking with Natalie, this is her, because she runs the company, this is why she picks up our awards. So we won an innovation award some years ago now, from basically a storytelling guild in London, and it was for work that we'd done with CONDUCTTR. So CONDUCTTR is the world's biggest manga publisher, and they have a property called Attack on Titan, which is very big. And for this, we created a kind of Pokemon Go type experience, where it was coincided with the Anime Expo in LA. So we turned Little Tokyo into the Attack on Titan type domain. So your mobile phone would come up with sightings of Titans, which are big giants. And the way to kill these giants is you have to sort of slash the back of their neck. So what we did is we replicated this kind of slash pattern that you get on the phone. And the bigger the Titan, the more complicated the pattern was. So it would flicker up on your phone for a brief period, and then you'd have to kind of try to remember it. So that was all quite good. It was all in the entertainment space. But then fast forward to about 2018, and we focused the whole of the business on crisis simulation. We decided that that was our killer application, and we stopped doing all the entertainment type projects, but we did bring all of that expertise, and it paid off quite well last year. This is Natalie again, and we won the Queen's Award for Innovation. I don't know, I wouldn't expect the rest of the world to be royal spotters, but this is Prince Charles. So he's the well, I think the British think of him as slightly eccentric, but he's into sort of a sustainable farming. He's into architecture. He's not to be confused with Prince Andrew. He's the one who hangs out with paedophiles, and not to be confused with Harry. He's the one who hangs out with gold diggers. So they've all got their little angle, but this is Prince Charles. He's next in line for the throne. And this is what the actual award looks like. It's like this crystal thing. And you can see in the corner, even though we're in the corner space, we've still got time for a life-size cutout of Tom, whatever his name is, the Spider-Man guy. So yeah, so that's life in the office. So let's look at what we do as storytellers and what we do as a company. As storytellers, we are always framing reality. So even if you're making a documentary, you're deciding what truths or what aspects of reality should go into that story that you're telling. So you're always editing, and you're always kind of deciding this is not part of my reality, or not part of the reality that I want the audience to see. And when you watch these kind of, you know, so-called reality shows like the Real Housewives of Orange County, or the Real Housewives of Atlanta, or whatever, or The Apprentice, whoever's editing and producing that show, they already decide who's going to be the bad person, who's going to be the good person, who's going to, you know, which of these different characters are going to fit a certain stereotype or a certain caricature. And then they would obviously selectively edit and find the clips that, and there's quite a good TV show, I think it's called Unreal, where they look kind of, I mean, it's a scripted fictional film, but they kind of look TV show, and it looks behind the scenes at how the producers kind of wind people up in order to create conflict, because everyone's looking for drama, aren't they? So they always go on there. Now what we do is we use storytelling and technology to orchestrate the delivery of content, and that allows us to create a certain perception inside this kind of closed environment that we now deliver our exercises in. So a good example of this framing reality, I really like these kind of location-based audio experiences. So the people you see here in the foreground, we all met previously over in Charing Cross, which is about, I don't know, 200 yards from where this photograph was taken in Trafalgar Square. And as the clock got to the hour, everyone pressed play on their phone or on their MP3 player, and then the audio, because it wasn't any more sophisticated than that, it's just a soundtrack, that audio directed us to another location. And what's happening is there are actors that the audio is directing our attention towards. So everybody else there in Trafalgar Square who doesn't have a headset is wondering what we're looking at. And it's a bit difficult to see, but there's a guy there, I don't know if he's some kind of like public security person, but he's, you know, you see a group of people looking in a direction, so everybody else wonders what are they looking at, and they'll kind of look in that way. But it's a good example of where the narrative that's in our headsets is framing reality. So in theory, you would say, well, it's the same reality for everyone, but we're being very selective about what we see and about how we interpret what we see. So we might have two actors sort of miming, and this audio is telling us what's going on. It's important to sort of, you know, give the examples, because where we are today is looking at real implications of this kind of selective perception, let's say, this need for us to make sense of the world through stories. This is taken from, I don't know if you know, but this is a US agency. It's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. It's not a name that kind of just trips off the tongue easily, but they're looking at educating certain parts of government in combating misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. So misinformation is basically false information, but it wasn't put out into the sort of public domain with any kind of malice, whereas disinformation is purposely intended to harm someone by misleading them. And then malinformation is it might be a fact, but it's taken out of context. So it's where something was true at some point in time. You might be looking at something or listening to something which is factual, but the context has been changed completely. And these kind of basic tools are being used by foreign adversaries and all kinds of different people that are trying to basically divide communities, divide the country, and just cause friction where they can. So to give you a good example of how important storytelling is, this slide is a poll, represents a poll that was taken in November 2020, and we're looking at a survey of Trump disapprovers. So you could say Democrats, but it doesn't say that, but Trump disapprovers on the top, and then Trump approvers on the bottom. And they were asked, who do you expect to be inaugurated as president in January 21? Now, this is after Biden had won the election, and we can see that 50% of people think of Trump approvers think that Biden's not even going to get elected. And this is because Trump spread a lot of disinformation about the integrity of the vote that had taken place. Now we move forward to I think this was, so January 2021. So Biden's already in power now, and it says, do you think there was widespread voter fraud in the 2020 election? 41% of people still think yes, even though factually it's been widely disproved. And all of the nonsense that the people were coming up with who doubted the vote about the integrity of the voting machines and saying those companies that provide the voting machines took to court or threatened to take to court people like Fox News and all these other kind of pro-Trump outlets because they were saying it's factually absolutely incorrect. And all the things you're accusing us of doing are not even technically possible to do. But you see how the narrative is so powerful that it lingers on. And back again to this agency, what they're trying to do here is educate the staff on how to defend against misinformation. It's trying to say, look, people might say this about what's happened, but what you need to do is say what the reality is. And really, the truth is all that you've got to rely on. And the problem is that the truth is often built on sort of shifting sands, and it is all about perception. And I think we're going to come up, we're going to touch on that throughout this presentation. So one of the things that attracts people to, let's say, like disinformation and malinformation and so on, is a sense of connection with other people. So if we think of, so when we say, well, why do people want to do these things? Why is it that the country is divided into, not just the country, the world, into those who want to have lockdowns, those who don't, those who want to wear masks, those who don't, those who want to have vaccination, those who don't? Why is everything so politicized? And a lot of it is being driven by intrinsic motivations to be significant, to connect with other people. And the QAnon conspiracy is basically a massive alternate reality game that brings a lot of disaffected people together, and it gives meaning to their lives. It's complete nonsense. I mean, you couldn't. I mean, if somebody, if we were to go into a corporate exercise, we've got a great idea for a scenario. Basically, there's a big cabal of Satan worshipping paedophiles, and their basic nerve center is underneath a pizza restaurant in Washington. You'd get laughed out of the room. But here we are with this nonsense still being propagated, and it's because of the like it appeals to a certain type of person. And I've got this quote here that's saying, what's interesting about social media and these types of conspiracies and disinformation and so on is that because people are actively engaged in it, they take some kind of ownership of it. It becomes more part of their life. It's not like just sitting back and passively reading some propaganda. They're actually leaning into it, and it becomes much more meaningful to them. So what we try to do is simulate these types of environments, and I'm going to get on later to explain how we go about creating them. But before moving on, I just want to talk about how transmedia storytelling in the activist space has really moved on a lot, and why it's so powerful. So this was a photograph just after Trump lost the election, and I don't know why, it just makes me laugh because it's so brazen and so sort of out there. There's someone just driving around the streets with this thing. And if you think of the Trump baby, what a powerful message this sends. So there's lots of coded messages in this one kind of stunt. Let's call it that. And you could get people writing massive white papers or all kinds of things about, you know, some kind of personality critique of what was ex-President Trump now. But really, the Trump baby is just so accessible, so multilingual, that it's a really powerful image. And I think that the organization which is best at this transmedia storytelling for activism right now is Extinction Rebellion. I think Extinction Rebellion have really got it down in terms of all the different channels that they play out. They have live performance, they've got posters, like it kind of feels a bit cool. And one of the things I wanted to bring up here is about when we're looking to simulate different factions, different points of view, it's really important to consider lexicon. It's really important to consider what language people use. And I think Extinction Rebellion have been instrumental in trying to shift away from the phrase global warming and towards kind of climate emergency. And these terms matter, and we can, based on the sort of phrases that people use, we can see, or we can infer, which narrative is really winning out. So you might have people say socialized medicine versus affordable healthcare. They would be two different phrases referring to the same thing that would tell you something about that, about what that person's belief system is. Now, everything that we hear is filtered through our biases. So when we're looking at perception, I mentioned before about the intrinsic motivations, the need for significance and connection, and how they can kind of draw us into these kind of conspiracies and so on. But if we think of biases, biases act as a way to kind of, again, frame reality. We don't like to be confronted with things that we don't already believe to be true. So once someone's made up their opinion about something, it's very hard to shift it. They become very blinkered, and you won't change somebody's point of view by kind of rubbing their nose in it and saying like, you're totally wrong. You have to find much more subtle ways of removing those blinkers to get them to see a broader perspective. And one of the points I wanted to make on this side about our biases is that once other people recognize there are biases, we can be led around by them. And there's this like Buddhist sort of story about, you know, if you've got a dog on a lead, you might think that you're leading the dog, like, oh, I'm in control of this dog because he's on the lead. But basically that dog will pull you around everywhere. And that dog represents your sort of biases and your preconceptions, and wherever, and advertising companies do this all the time. So here's an example. It's a campaign by the World Wildlife Fund, and they're campaigning to bring awareness to animal trafficking, basically, like illegal ivory trade. So they set up this campaign to say that, oh, in Singapore there's this website and you can buy ivory. And of course, so many people don't do their fact checking. They say, oh, it's disgusting, this is disgraceful. And you might say, well, you know, it's for a good cause, but it's an advertising company that knows this is going to be completely triggering, rather than say, you know, there's this trade that goes on in illegal ivory. It's really inhumane. It's not very nice. Rather than just come out and say that, what they want to do is they want to get people angry, because, you know, when they get people angry, they're going to take to social media and it's going to get much more exposure than just a basic fact. But it's a good example where we have a fiction posing as reality in an everyday space where you might not expect it, because you're not going into a theme park to see this. You're not sitting down to watch a movie. This is just in that information sphere where stuff that's true and stuff that's not true all blends together. And I just included two other examples. So in the last election, in the UK, one of the political parties created these fictional newspapers that are designed to look like local newspapers. And of course, they, you know, I've called it fake news, but it's quite, and they did get in trouble for this because it was, you know, thought that it was misrepresenting the actual local newspaper and misleading, let's say. But it's been done for a long while. This is a band that I like called Crass, and this was basically one of the newspapers they came out with back in the 80s. So it is quite a common thing. So just to sort of lighten it a little bit before I get onto the design techniques, I wanted to give a couple of examples from the art world, which I really like and really illustrate this power of storytelling and the power of perception. So this is a collection of artwork from Damien Hirst, who's a British artist, and this collection is called Treasures from the Wreck of the Unbelievable. And on Netflix, there is actually a documentary about this collection. Now, the idea, that the way the story goes, was that there was this boat and it set off in the Mediterranean thousands of years ago with all these different artworks on board, all these different sculptures and everything, and it sank to the bottom of the sea, the Mediterranean. And what Damien Hirst and his documentary crew have done is they've dragged it up from the bottom of the ocean. Now, all of this is completely fictional. None of this is not a shred of truth in any of this. It's completely from the mind of Damien Hirst. And the documentary pretends to be a real documentary, and it just goes through the whole thing. And what's amazing about this, what really helps to sell it in, is the scale of it. So this sculpture is many probably about like 3 or 4 people high. So you could go around this building and look at this, and it's like the ambition of this collection is what helps to sell in the idea that it might have actually been real, because they took over the whole of Venice. These are photographs that I took myself. It took over the whole of Venice, and it's just so impressive. And it really, you can allow yourself to imagine, wow, imagine if that were really true. But of course, it's all fictional. And then to look at an example from another British artist, this is Banksy, who's better known for like all his graffiti stuff. So this was an installation that he made called Dismal Land, and I think you can tell that he's trying to parody Disney, complete with a massive queue to get into the gate, and everything's completely sort of perverted and twisted upside down. And I think this is an artist with something important to say that's challenging how our conventional perception of the way that things are, and asking, you know, do they need to be that way? So this is security. Like nothing here is real. So these are like cardboard booths. There's a cardboard CCTV camera there. I don't know if they have ice cream vans outside of the UK. I know I saw one in Cyprus recently, but this is quite an iconic sort of thing. It would turn up on street corners, giving, you know, with a little bell going, calling people out to buy ice creams. So here you can see it's been sort of burned out. All the wheels have been stolen. And this was another common thing that you might see at these sort of fairgrounds, these sort of remote controlled boats, but these ones are filled with refugees. So he's trying to draw attention to really important things in his life and in the world by twisting the way we normally perceive things. This was a caravan that you could sort of spin upside down. This was a stall trying to get kids addicted to addicted to loans, to get them in debt from a really young age. And if you've seen any of my work before, I sound a bit like Kent Brockman now from The Simpsons, but you might remember me from this diagram where we look at bringing together different types of platforms to tell a coherent story. And I was reminded of this when I saw this poster at the Banksy thing. So they've got all these bits of plastic, and this is like taking the mickey about Transmedia right off, because they're saying, yeah, there's all these bits of plastic, and if they probably all have different personalities and abilities. And it's just basically at the Transmedia playbook, and it's totally designed just to sell you product, basically. And sure enough, at the bottom here, it's got, you know, in the battle between these different characters, there's only one winner, and that's the toy company. So let's look at experience design. I'll just rest my voice for a second. So I thought it was necessary just to show you a little bit about what it is that we offer, so that we have some sort of shared context. So our clients, they interact with the crisis exercises that we create through a virtual desktop. So people log in and they see an unfolding crisis or unfolding situation through channels that they would already be familiar with. So through email, social media, graph channels, whatever it might be. And everything here is customizable. So depending on the exercise, we would, here I'm showing a news page. And the way to think of this conceptually is like a portal into the story world. So here I have a diagram. On the vertical axis, we've got the real world on the left, the story world on the right, sorry, on the horizontal axis, and on the vertical axis, we've got the digital at the top and the physical on the bottom. So here we are in the real physical world, but we're using the laptop, the virtual desktop, as a portal into the story world. So on the other side through that looking glass, which is the computer, there's another me. It's the me in the story world, and I'm interacting with these other people who might be other player characters, or they might be computer generated characters. I've got no way of knowing, because we're just mingling in the story world all together. And what I think is interesting about this is, remember, we're not in the real world anymore. We're not on the real Twitter. We're not on real email. It's in CONDUCTTR's sealed simulation environment. And that means we can really manipulate and visualize the information space. So the information space is normally characterized as being on these three different sort of layers. So there's the physical layer. So that would be, you know, what device is someone using? Are they on a mobile? Are they on a physical laptop? Where are they in the world? And then we have the virtual layer, which is what platforms are they active on? Are they sending a lot of emails? Are they active on Twitter, more than they are on Facebook? And then the important one really, ultimately, is the cognitive space. And what we're asking here is, what can we infer from what people do and say about how they're thinking? So if there's a narrative that's in that sphere, is it gaining traction? Do people believe that? Are people kind of retweeting it? Are they? So for example, we might look at trending hashtags and the sentiment on the hashtags. Now, of course, all this is simulated, and we're reacting to what the players do, and while all the time progressing through to meet certain training objectives. And the training audience themselves, the players, they are also able to have these kind of tools like they would have in real life to sort of listen to the social media environment. So they can decide what are the phrases they want to listen to, what characters they might want to follow. And when they take action in that space, they can decide if they're getting or they can see if they're getting the reaction they want or not. So when we come on to design these types of spaces, a key consideration for us is the readiness of the training audience, like how skilled they are. So this is showing a spectrum from very scripted exercise, which in the gaming world, where you would say it was on rails. So there's not much that someone can do to actually get it off the rails. And on the left-hand side, it's a very open world space, so a lot more freedom. And here I'm showing a distinction between training and exercising. So training is when the team or the training audience are quite new to it, and they need some scaffolding to help them along, to show them how things work. Let's say the information world works. Whereas when you move into exercising, it's much more about rehearsal, and people want the trainers want a much greater, much more realistic world here than on the scripted side. And in order to go after that sort of realism, it's really important to know what it is you're trying to achieve with your players, with your training audience. Now, if you were on a shooting range, or even if you weren't, everyone's familiar with a target or a dartboard. You know that in the center is where you should be aiming for. And if you get outside of that, you need to improve. You know where to aim. That's not always quite so evident in an artistic endeavor or with storytelling. One way to think of this might be as a comedian. So the comedian tells a joke, and if he just gets a little ripple, then he knows he's not hit the bullseye. But if he tells a joke and he takes the lid off the room, everyone's laughing and falling around, he can say that was a bullseye. Now, the thing for that comedian is you don't always know who's going to be in that room, because you might tell a joke one night or in one part of the country and everyone falls off their chairs laughing, and then you'll tell that joke to a different audience another night and they won't find it funny at all. And that's because different audiences react to different messages, they they have a different relationship to that joke. And so when you're trying to plan your narrative, you have to think of like, who is my target audience? What is it that will resonate with them? So all the things that you would normally do as a content creator, is this relevant? Will it resonate? Does it have any kind, you know, what do I want him to do next? All of that has to be taken into account in order to try and score this bullseye. And the other thing to bear in mind is you have to design the information environment, the training experience, to suit the training objectives. So here what I'm trying to say with these diagrams is, if you wanted to train someone in, let's say, urban door-to-door combat, you wouldn't do it on a tank range. And if you were training somebody to be a tank driver, you wouldn't do it in a close combat kind of urban environment. And so it is for us with our simulated information environment. We need to know, okay, what are the training objectives? And then we will build that world for you. So let's look at how we start thinking about immersion. So this diagram on the left is quite a well-known one. It's not from us. I've got the attribution in the bottom there. But the idea is that there's 3 types of immersion that you should consider when you're creating any experience, really. Sensory immersion. So am I turned on through what I see, through what I hear, maybe what I smell? Imaginative immersion, the way we interpret that is through the narrative. So is it relevant? And if you're doing a training experience, adults want to know, like, why is that relevant to me? Like, what will I get out of it? So the narrative has to be meaningful. And if the details are incorrect, often people will use that as an excuse to draw themselves away from it and say, oh, that would never happen, or, you know, that person's got the wrong boots on. Those boots were discontinued in, I don't know, 10 years ago, and they wouldn't be wearing them now. So they can all be these barriers that people might throw up, having sort of come out of that immersion that we want them to be in. And then the final one here is challenge-based immersion. So it's really important in the participatory experiences we create to give people a purpose, to give them a goal. So this diagram here redraws the diagram from the previous page. And here I've got challenge, and I'm showing it as a radar diagram. And I've got different types of things, activities, let's say, that the training audience might do in one of our exercises. So we call this player agency. So they could gather information, they could analyze it, they could make decisions, they could collaborate with other people, they could decide not to do anything, and they could produce stuff. And this is quite a famous, it's called the odor loop. It's quite a famous diagram that describes the way that people interact with the environment, or the way they should. So what they should be doing is observing the information and trying to make sense of it. They should then decide what they want to do. So they put together a strategy, and then they do it, or they give the instruction to do something. And this is us. So we are, as the storytellers, as the masters of this information space, we're adjudicating. So we see what they do, and then we issue instruction, either technically or through sort of human players, to change the world to reflect the new state of the world following an action or inaction that's been taken by the players. And I think one of the challenges in any participatory experience is to give the players enough agency and freedom to do what they think is the right thing to do without them breaking everything. And I'm illustrating that in these series of diagrams. So if this outer ellipse is the story world and our story is inside it, we want them to be able to tell their own story, but without breaking through. So if the story world is Harry Potter or James Bond or Star Wars, you don't want like the Mandalorian turning up in Harry Potter. That that would break the story world. And so when we're designing these experiences, we're trying to think of how we can make them elastic. So how can we give the players freedom to act, but when they start pushing up on that boundary of where we want them to go, and we say we don't want them to go any further, how can we start to push them back? How can we get them without sort of coming out of the story world? Because obviously you could like halt the exercise and say, stop doing that. We don't want to do that. We want to show them that they're either making progress or distorting things in the wrong way without breaking out the story world. So this diagram this is a way for us to describe how we achieve that. Lots of people, when they do scenario planning, they will create a diagram like this, and they'll choose two axes of uncertainty. So this is looking at a quarantine, like basically a pandemic type situation. And this vertical axis looks at an effective quarantine or an ineffective quarantine. And across the horizontal axis, we have effective public communication. And on the right-hand side, poor or ineffective public communication. So you can see here, the worst of all worlds is an ineffective quarantine and ineffective public communication. So the pandemic, the virus will spread and there's a breakdown of social order. What you really want is for the training audience to get in this cell with an effective quarantine and good, effective public communication. So people understand why it's important and they basically play by the rules, and then the pandemic recedes and society's happy. Now, in simulating that environment, what we would look to do is try to send the training audience signals about where they are. Now, we wouldn't share that diagram with them. They're going to come in and they're going to, take part in the exercise, doing whatever they need to do. But the world, either through social media or through email or whatever other channels we might use, we would be signaling back to them feedback about how their choices are affecting that environment. And what we're trying to show here is, as they get increasingly further out, we might the signals will get stronger. So the sentiment of what we send, the volume of the content will increase. And it's a little bit like if you play like, a normal computer game, and if you take something like Near Automata or something, probably one of the best games I've played for a long time. You're in the desert somewhere and you're trying to make, you're trying to cut a path somewhere. It feels like an open world, but when you go too far, the wind picks up and it starts pushing you back and you keep sort of rolling down. And it's like when you try to make progress in any other game, a combat type game, but your character isn't at the right level yet. You keep getting beaten back, and then you realize, right, I don't think I'm supposed to go in that area yet. I'm going to go and look somewhere else. And so it's trying to apply that sort of technique to messaging in this information space. So a couple of final things I wanted to say on that, because I can see I'm running out of time, is a lot of people think about or talk about branching in storytelling because that's what they know. But what they really mean is, I want a game or an experience which is responsive to the player decision. So I want the players to feel that what they do is meaningful, and they then think, oh, that means I need branching, but that's not necessarily true. So Aspen Arseft introduced me to this concept of satellites and kernels. So the kernel of a story is like really the core things. Without those kernels, the story doesn't exist as a particular story. And I think the example he gives is Little Red Riding Hood. So he said, in order for the story of Little Red Riding Hood, you need Little Red Riding Hood and you need the wolf. So there are two key kernels. But orbiting around that is all the other story stuff that gives it flavor and it gives it, creates the world. And we can allow the players to make that up or go anywhere they want with that. And that's what we're showing here. So what we would do is these key events, would be things where we want to move the players between in order to achieve our training objectives. But the pattern of life, the actual buzz in that environment, the way that world is shifting, can be completely dependent or determined by what the training audience do. And it gives them a sense of, a meaning that they're effective in controlling that in that storytelling environment. And what we're showing here is how we would try to sort of guide them between key events. So they start here, and all those satellites, they start to sort of transfer the orbit onto the next key event. And just to see what it looks like behind the scenes, this is Maria, my colleague, looking at the nerve center. So this was an exercise that looked at the high north, looked at the Arctic area, because as the polar ice caps are melting, there's new trade routes across the top of the world that haven't been opened before, and that's causing lots of Russia's already militarizing quite a lot of the Arctic. It means that lots of minerals that weren't mineable before because the ice was too thick now become accessible. And obviously, if there are minerals and resources, especially rare earth metals that are up there for batteries and so on, electronics, it makes it a contested area. So anyway, the point being is these screens allow us to see the information environment from different angles. And this was another exercise where we've got some role players. There's Natalie again, there's Maria again. So this is what it looks like behind the scenes on a quite a big exercise, when you could consider us to be the game masters here. Now, a final slide on that is, just because we've got this sort of virtual desktop, it doesn't mean that everything has to be purely digital. So in a lot of exercises, there will be face-to-face engagements. A good example of this is, let's say you're a humanitarian organization and you want to get supplies, or you want to get food and water, or you want to get people out of a difficult area. You might need to go in and negotiate with armed non-state actors, or even with a military, and negotiate about getting access to airports or roads or so on. So we can simulate that. So we would have role players like humans, and they would meet the training audience and have real face-to-face conversations. And then what would happen is the training audience go back and they think they have one perception of how that engagement worked, but then these key leaders, who are basically part of the exercise control team, would feed back to us about that interaction, and that would then cause their followers or reaction to come up on social media, and there might be some other reaction going back. So just like in the real world, I sit there at a desktop, I sit at a desktop at a computer all the time, but it doesn't mean I can't get up and meet people. It doesn't mean I can't make a phone call and talk to somebody. So it's really thinking about how do we mix and match these in the right way? Right, final thing, realism. Everybody wants their exercises to be realistic, but what do we mean by realism? There's two ways to look at it. I think it's the fidelity of the world, and through analogy, like how closely does it represent in an analogous way the situation that you want people to be rehearsed in. So if we look first at fidelity, if we were talking about digital resolution, it's very easy to see that this sort of image is very pixelated and this one is very detailed. This is a high-res image, and you would know that creating a high-res image is probably more expensive and would take longer. And it's the same in the information space. So what we would do is build selectively around the different training objectives. And it's a bit like any kind of theatre or film performance. You would have the leading cast, you would have the supporting cast, background actors, and that's what we do as well. So the leading cast would be quite well defined. They would have very detailed social stuff, so you could click them, you could find out who their associates were. But then by the time you get down into the general population, there might not be quite so much detail. They're more acting en masse as a particular target audience or as a faction rather than an individual. And all of those people need but basically unique flavors. So whenever there's a Twitter storm, whenever, like if you take what's happening, the events of today, people are taking to social media, we get all these different types of communication going on, emotional reactions, offers to help. We have people who are eyewitnesses to the events, and then other people just expressing their opinion or trying to make it all about them. And what we look to do is, in terms of the realism, is not only the lexicon and so on, but also the way that information spreads. So again, this is an older diagram from the sort of transmedia days. When we look at disinformation, it tends to start in unusual areas or in sort of small niche communities where it kind of festers until it builds up a head of steam, and then it breaks out into much more mainstream. So it might start in a Reddit forum or on 4chan, it might start in a WhatsApp group, and then it would gather some sort of steam there and then blast out, let's say, onto Twitter or onto Facebook where more people catch it, and then it starts to really sort of multiply. And someone at the Brookings Institute created this breakout scale to describe how different communications might travel across different platforms. So one, like a category 1 type message might be something that never ever leaves a single platform. So it starts on Twitter and it ends on Twitter and it don't really go anywhere else. But in the worst case, it might end up in actually people on the street calling for policy change, end up in riots or so on. And what we do when we create these different experiences, we look to see, how big is this event? How big are these things? How would we expect this to develop, and try to do that in a realistic way? And sometimes we will be doing that live, and sometimes we'll be doing it with pre-scripted content that we'd kind of anticipated where we were going. So just to finish up then, looking now at analogy, this diagram shows a young sort of teenage girl with a plastic baby, and the idea of this baby is to dissuade youngsters from getting pregnant at too early an age. So you can see that it doesn't have realistic hair. It doesn't even look like a proper baby. It just looks like a doll. So in fidelity terms, it's not like a real baby. But in terms of analogy, it wets itself. It needs to be cared for. It cries. So all of the stress and the aggravation of caring for an infant is contained in this baby. So it's very analogous. So the emotional experience, the intention at least, for this person is very close to, they're looking for this person to learn a lesson through caring for this baby, which has a very low fidelity. So I think when you're creating experiences, it's important to think to yourself, where am I, I know I want it to be realistic, but in what way? Am I trying to create an emotion? Do I want to be emotionally truthful, or does it need to be sort of realistic in the sense that like it behaves or it looks, it's got like a high degree of fidelity? And I thought I'd end on this picture from Van Gogh because it kind of summarizes really. We can see that they're trees, but he's gone with an analogous display. What he's trying to do here is convey an emotion. He's not interested in the fidelity. He's not interested in painting trees that actually look like trees. What he's trying to do is show his state of mind. This is actually at a mental hospital. And so I think this kind of thinking is useful for when we're trying to create these worlds, to give us some guidance about how we should be designing these experiences. So thank you very much. Sorry, I think I might have run over. I think I might have been just on time, but it was close. So thank you very much. I'd be very interested to answer any questions.
Right. Thank you so much, Robert, for this presentation. Anybody, if you have questions, can you type them in the Q&A or in the chat, and I will ask them. We have some people who wanted to speak, so please feel free to type your question for Robert. Hold on, let me see. Somebody's typing the question over here. In the meantime, as you guys type the questions, I want to ask Robert a question as well myself. So as you think about those, information restructure like Trump baby or some kind of visible, QAnon and all of those things. In many ways, it's very difficult to reframe the conversation because people are so used to, believing what they already believe in. Yeah. So,
yeah.
Things like Trump baby, for example, kind of already speaks to pre-existing audience and doesn't really change anyone's opinion about anything. Yeah. How do you think those kind of gestures, those performative gestures, can restructure or at least open up a line of communication between the two different opposing fractions on a particular subject matter?
Oh God, I have no idea, to be honest. I don't know. I don't think I've got a good answer for that. I mean, once someone, it's almost like, I think what's good about those things is they're kind of humorous. And what you'd hope is that even if someone were a Trump supporter, in that particular case, they can see the humor in it, and it might work over time. I mean, shifting some, we know, you're definitely not going to change someone's behavior by facts. I mean, people often talk about the cigarette sort of issue. Loads of people smoke. There's lots of evidence that it kills people much more quickly than not smoking, but yet still people smoke. So it's not about lack of information. It's an emotional attachment to it, and those types of things just take time. So I don't actually have an answer for that type of thing, because I mean, our area of expertise is basically creating the crisis, not solving it. that's the difference.
All right, very good. We have a question from Emmanuel, and she asked, can storytelling reframe intrinsic biases based on someone's values? Do you have an example?
I mean, I would say it is possible. I mean, if you can identify your target and you have the right strategy, you can. Yeah, I mean, there is. I'm trying to think of there are models for how to do this type of communication. It's not easy, and to shift somebody, could take months to years to change. So once someone's got a certain belief system, you're not going to change it overnight. So it's a continual process of trying to move them gradually along. I think that the faster you try to go, the more resistance you're going to get. So that's the problem there. I think it's just giving people time to come to their own realization.
Well, the US elections are kind of an interesting case to observe, yeah, because you have these two competing narratives, and people in the middle who can be, the narrow group of the voters who can be potentially swung the last minute, and the October surprise and all of those kind of things. And it's sort of interesting to each time when I watch it, it's really interesting to see how the narratives are being formed on both sides, and which narrative takes over. Particularly the last two elections were very interesting, from the narrative point of view, because I know how both Trump and Biden and Clinton framed their storylines was very interesting, and it did influence the outcome of the election. Yeah, but in many ways, those outcomes were also influenced by very kind of a hard reality. The economy, the COVID, all of those things, and those things were framed differently but by each politician. And it's sort of interesting to see how different nuggets of knowledge, of information were being structured differently by each camp.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
and everyone goes for the center. I think that's the important thing there. What you said is like everyone fights for the center, because the people that have got entrenched views, they're lost. They've already they say, well, they're on our side, they're not going to change, and they are unwinnable. So it's the people in the middle that if we can nudge them either side. That's,
well, I mean, the other strategy, of course, is to suppress the vote or to create a kind of demotivate the voters of the opposite camp, and demotivating voters of the opposite camp means not just discredit their candidate, but also to create an environment in which going to vote for that candidate would not be, the excitement factor would not be there. So there seem to be always this kind of a competing strategies to attack the center and swing the vote of the center, and while at the same time demotivate the voters on the opposite end. And that's partially the information wars. What they are
exactly, yeah, to create doubt and uncertainty. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Do we have any other questions that anybody wants to ask? Let me see Q&A over here. Robert answered some question typing. We have people saying hello from Los Angeles and Germany.
Thank you.
Any other? I mean, the pandemic was quite an interesting case of different narratives and the way that those narratives function. Yeah, I mean, it was so tragic that many people, lost lives because they failed to vaccinate, and how those deaths are now being interpreted as a hospital's fault for not following the protocols. Yeah, and so we see kind of a continuous creation of the narrative in response to the original choice. Like, it's extremely difficult for people to change their mind even when their lives are at stake. Yeah, there is the research I'm doing right now is a kind of that people are willing to die for their kind of perceived sense of dignity, which oftentimes comes with the original choice which they make, and that's difficult to change. Yeah. What did you think, like, as you're looking at those pandemic misinformation and the different debates and how science is being framed, what's scientific and what's not scientific, and the sort of lack of understanding of how science actually works, that it's not the exact, science is not an exact science. It's a bunch of data at particular moment developed based on facts that we have on the ground in the particular moment. Yeah. So how when you're observing this happening in UK and these different narratives taking shape in Europe, and what were you thinking? Like, what could have been done better in terms of communication in UK and also in the US? What did the authorities could have done better to be able to communicate, to send a better, healthcare message?
I think the problem here was that in the beginning there was a lack of masks, so they said masks are not that helpful. So they was, in order that the public didn't rush out and buy all the masks because they needed them for healthcare workers. And then when there were enough masks, they then said, actually, it is better if you wear a mask because now all the healthcare workers had them. And then of course, you've got two conflicting messages. It's like, well, you told me they weren't useful. Now you're telling me they are useful. Are they useful or are they not? And so anything like that, the moment someone misspeaks, or, if there's any kind of conflicting information, most people don't have time for nuance. They don't have time for like a reasoned debate. They just want to know, is it true or is it false? And they sort of run off with something. And I think that's the problem. That's what the authorities are up against all the time, because they need to just keep communicating clearly with the same message all the time. I think we did quite a good job before in the first lockdown, because they kind of scared everyone witless to get them to stay in. So they were very, very effective with that. And then we had a couple of missed starts. I think they were a bit too ambitious about getting people back to work. And so they say, oh, it's safe to go back. And everyone started going back. They go, oh, no, it ain't. It's not. And then, of course, everyone's like, well, is it safe or is it not? So whenever you got, that's the trouble. And no one, I think we expect our leaders to be kind of superhuman, but they're just like regular people. They're just dealing with the facts as presented to them at the time. They don't have any crystal ball. There is no Illuminati controlling everything. I don't believe that for a second. So anybody that's trying to piece together all these different random events and trying to claim that it's all a conspiracy is just absolute nonsense. I just don't believe they could organize it that well. Like if they were that great at organizing stuff,
the chaos,
like the tubes would run all the time, like the trains would never get stuck on the line. So it's yeah. I think that's
what you're saying, the kind of conflicting messages on masks. I mean, it would be better if, I think what happened was that a lot of public felt misled and manipulated. Instead of just telling the public, yes, masks are effective, but we need them we need the N95s and, for the healthcare workers. And can you get some type of other mask, or maybe make yourself?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, that would be much more honest communication. And once the public feels like they are being manipulated for other end, they are told something which is not good for their health, which is good for their health, not for their welfare, but for the welfare of somebody else. That's when the mistrust seeps in, and the public like what's the messaging? What's the purpose of the message that you're telling me? In the first place.
Exactly.
Is there some other purpose, or is it my welfare? Is the population welfare really at stake, or is there some group that you're trying to protect for whatever reason? Yeah. And so, like once you do this once, it's very difficult to undo the damage, so to speak. Yeah, that sort of building
absolutely
with the public is extremely important. So
absolutely.
Yeah, this is a good example. Yeah. All right. Okay. All right. Everyone, thank you so much for participating. Robert, thank you, for this wonderful lecture. The lecture will be posted on Mahindra Humanities Center website soon. And we want to thank MetaLab for hosting us and Mahindra Humanities Center for sponsoring the seminar. We have 2 more seminars this academic semester coming up in March and April, and then we have one panel that's also coming up. So I encourage everyone to check out our website, MetaLab website, or Mahindra Humanities website, and we welcome everyone to sign up and to visit our page and to check out other seminars previously recorded this year and from last year as well. And again, thank you so much, Robert. It was great.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Take care. See you. Thank you, everyone, for signing in. See you later. Bye.
Bye-bye.